I'm Jenna Wolf. On a Tuesday morning, that is the Hall of Famer Chris Carter. This is Nick Wrights. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
We got a big show for you today. Big news from Odell Beckham Jr. Shaq rips into Boogie Cousins. Nick Wright got his morning tweet out on time.
Of course, as always.
Nick Wright. So we got a lot to get to. We are going to start with the quarterback situation in San Francisco, which is really just two words, Jimmy Garoppolo. We haven't heard much from the 49ers quarterback, especially about his time in New England as Tom Brady's backup. The guy his former Patriot teammates used to call Prince Aladdin because of his studly good looks turned some heads yesterday when he admitted he thought he was better than Tom Brady. To give it some context, he felt he had to keep believing that in order to compete with Tom Brady. CeCe, what do you make of Jimmy G thinking this?
I'm not surprised at all. Just being in the NFL locker room as long as I was, being associated with players that have been able to make it to that level, you have to be a very, very special, not only type of athlete, and if you don't have the athleticism, you have to have a very special mentality because the NFL and the NFL locker room is not like any other locker room in professional sports. You're talking about the competition. When you don't have the guarantees that you have in basketball, when you don't have the guarantees that you have in baseball long term, all you can do is prove yourself on a daily basis. So when you go down that 53-man roster, now you're talking about some bad guys. I tell a story that every bully from every city project, from every country town, from every big city is in the NFL. All the best athletes from all around the country, their cities, and sometimes all around the world, they're in the NFL. So they have extreme confidence in what they do. That's how you can forget about Jimmy G, what he thought about Tom Brady. What about Tom Brady, what he thought when he entered the league? The first day he met Bob Kraft, he told him, this is going to be the
best decision you ever made since you bought the team.
This guy's a multi-millionaire, and you got some skinny kid with nobody.
199th pick.
And what? Yeah.
He got beat out at Michigan by Henson. So the extreme confidence in the NFL, it's not surprising. I had a guy once in the prime of my career. I wasn't practicing a lot that day, and he was having a spectacular day. I'm not even going to say his name, but he and my teammates will know. He was a great special teams player. He was having a tremendous day in practice. I wasn't practicing. And the coach said, man, Walshy, you look good.
Go ahead. I love you so much.
And the thing about it is, he was like, yeah, if you designed the whole game plan around me and you round the whole offense around me like you do Chris, I would look good. Well, the truth of the matter is he wouldn't because he didn't have the overall endurance. He didn't have the mentality. He didn't have the physical skill.
He had a good day.
And he wouldn't be. He had a good day. And he was a special teams player. But you couldn't tell. Man, you couldn't tell him that he couldn't.
But he could have passed a polygraph saying that.
Absolutely.
And he would have passed.
And all of them, for the most part, believe this. I've seen some other great stories that I think are significant. I was at the first practice when Aaron Rodgers took over for Brett Favre, when all the chaos and Ed Waters following Brett Favre, is he going to play? Man, you couldn't tell Aaron Rodgers that day. I saw him. I caught balls from Aaron Rodgers that day. Me and Greg Jennings, Donald Driver on the sideline, and you couldn't tell them or you couldn't tell Aaron that he wasn't better than Brett Favre. One of the greatest quarterbacks ever, and at that time, maybe the greatest Packer. You know, besides Bart Starr, Brett Favre is right there. And Steve Young. When Steve Young got traded from the USFL, from Tampa Bay Bandits, went to San Francisco, you know who he was backing up? Joe Montana. And you can't tell me Steve didn't think that he was a better quarterback than Joe was even at that time.
So, but listen, obviously Niner fans and maybe just football fans that root for as many great players as possible would love it to be the Aaron Rodgers story or the Steve Young story. I think it's important to note there are a lot of guys who are not Rodgers or Young that have this same mentality. Rodgers and Young had it, and they were correct. I'm not saying Young was better than Joe Montana, but he was right in thinking, man, I'm an all-timer too. Just wait till you see me. Rodgers was, I believe, correct in thinking, I mean, I'm better quarterback than Brett Favre, the greatest Packer of the last 40 years. But it's whether you actually get to that level or not, whether Jimmy Garoppolo, wins 5 Super Bowls, ever makes a single Super Bowl as a starting quarterback, you don't get the article on Bleacher Report that these quotes are in is fascinating. It had stuff in there that I didn't know, that he didn't pick up football till a later age, and when he did pick it up, he didn't pick up quarterback until a much later age because he was 6'2" in junior high school, so he was playing tight end. That you don't get from Eastern Illinois to a potential first-round draft pick if you don't have that mentality. You certainly don't get from a backup quarterback to one of the richest contracts in football history if you don't have that mentality. It's something that, and you give me a hard time about this sometimes, I don't think it's just mentality athletes have to have. I think if you want to be great in anything, you have to convince yourself you already are. The world just doesn't know it yet.
Yes, and the NFL has a mechanism with the competition every day. It's not, there are people in every walk of life that they think that, but they don't have competition every day that would make them have to prove that out. Even if you're very, very talented, whatever field you're in, you're not going to be, your example at work is not going to be, Tom Brady throws a 15-yard out, and you know who's up next? Jimmy Garoppolo.
It's not a head-to-head competition where they're keeping score each and every day.
Yes, and that brings out these competitive juices in people like Jimmy G.
Does that ever work to the detriment of a player? We talk about it being so great for the player to have all this confidence, but you wonder what happens if it's the opposite, if they have all the confidence and then they don't put the work in to back it up.
It's just like Nick Foles. Nick Foles said he's not going to get in a throwing quarterback competition with Carson. He said it's exhausting. He said it's not fair to the guy who is the starter. He said I'm there to support him. So when you have these types of competition, you have to realize too, like Tyrod Taylor, he realized he's got to help Baker out, but he's also realized, man, I might be the starter here for a year or two. So it's a balancing act. And that's why all guys can't be backups. That's why a lot of organizations, they get off of guys because they don't want that constant pressure and heat on their starter. Because a lot of starters do not thrive with having someone behind them because they feel threatened. And a lot of the stuff that we started hearing last year about Brady and New England and Garoppolo, those things are true. So I wouldn't be surprised because that happens.
That mentality, I think, can be great at almost every position for backup players, except for quarterback, in which case it can become problematic. There is no problem whatsoever if your backup defensive tackle thinks I'm the best defensive tackle on the team, right?
Yes.
That's actually a good thing. If the wide receiver you're mentioning, like if that makes him want to show out more on special teams and makes him work harder, and it's not going to cause an issue in the wide receivers room. It didn't seem like it did.
No, it actually helped us out because the days that I was able to take off, I knew. You know, like Walshy was going to handle things. And there were some days, too, that Walshy, because he used to like to stay out in the town.
Here we go.
And then it'd be like, hey, see, can you get me today? And I'd be like, hey, Walshy, I got you, because you got more days of getting me. So, yes, there is a push-pull there in trying to put that team together.
But the quarterback position's a different one.
Because he's not going to play.
He's not going to play, and there has to be one voice. It's almost a streamlined voice. Head coach to coordinator to quarterback.
Yes.
Sometimes the quarterback's coach is sandwiched in there. And that's what I think you saw. And this is a great article. I wasn't really familiar with the writer who wrote it beforehand. I thought the color in it was great. I thought it also it came out right before. He clearly wrote it before the Jimmy G went on that date. But there's a lot of anecdotes about Jimmy G being quite the ladies' man of Eastern Illinois. And so now that we have a little more context there, it's worth the read is the point I'm making. So, but you saw in the article that he said he and Brady would have a competition after practice. One of them was, he's called it a barrel. I think a barrel competition, just throwing balls into the barrel in the back of the end zone. And that sometimes he would win and they wouldn't speak the rest of the day. So, like, that's good to an extent. And then at some point at that position, it can reach hey, it's one of us or the other. Because if the guy is good enough to be a starter, he can't be there forever. He can't just be the heir apparent in a sport or an e-sport where the clock is always ticking on the length of your career.
He did go on to clarify that no matter how bad it got, the next day they would always come in and talk to each other, which is great. And the article does lend itself towards who this guy is. He's a really nice guy. In high school, when he didn't play quarterback and he played dead end, it's because his good friend played quarterback and he didn't want to take his position from him. So it's actually a really good read. But coming up, we're going to talk more about what this means for Jimmy Garoppolo and having to play behind Tom Brady, whether that made him the guy he is today. But coming up on the other side, which big star will be absent from training camp when it gets underway this week? The answer coming up next on First Things First. Moving on to the Cleveland Browns. The Browns announced they'll start training camp without wide receiver Josh Gordon. Gordon assured his fans and those keeping a distant eye on him that this was, quote, part of his overall health and treatment plan. After missing the 2015 and 2016 seasons due to violations of the substance abuse policy, Gordon played in 5 games last season, catching 18 passes and a touchdown. CC, Josh Gordon not in attendance the first day of training camp. What do you make of this?
It's a problem. It's a problem anytime that a player that has the history that Josh does. And it was fairly clear yesterday that the Browns and Josh himself had released some stuff. Someone from the office had sent me something about Josh, the tweet that he had sent out, that he hadn't flunked the test and everything. I was like, I can't get on Josh Gordon Twitter. You know what? Josh Gordon blocked me a number of years ago. Yeah, because I thought the Browns should have cut him when initially they started having problems. And a lot of it was based off, I knew that that was the moment of truth for me. People talk about they have a moment of truth, but they just lie. And it's like, is there some correction? That and being cut by Buddy Ryan, it changed my perspective and ultimately got me to where I should be.
Before you go on, I just wanted to, for the audience that didn't follow the story years ago, because at this point it now was years ago, this was when Josh was, what I would say was still in denial, or at least publicly in denial about his issues. And you went on TV, and this is before you and I knew each other, but I'd seen you on TV talking about this. I thought in a somewhat empathetic manner was talking about what was best for Josh. And Josh wrote an open letter to Chris Carter saying basically, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. I'm fine.
You don't know me. You don't care about me.
I'm fine. I'm healthy.
To which
you're ascribing issues to me that you dealt with that I don't deal with.
Yes.
And blocked you on Twitter, which whatever, who cares? But then we found a lot of what you were saying was spot on. And since then, you've been on, I just want the audience to understand, because I don't want people to think it's some petty beef. You've been on television as one of Josh Gordon's biggest advocates and biggest supporters as far as hoping he can get back in the league and hoping he can get healthy. So that's the background of what you mentioned.
Yeah, for me, it's not personal. It's not because who Josh is or anything. No, it's about what he's actually going through. And being a drug addict and recovering alcoholic, the things that people go through. Now, we think that just because you stop using the drugs, that you're going to be healthy and you're going to be your state of mind and you're going to be clear and buoyant. No, you're not. You go through different stages in recovery. And obviously, Josh is going through a stage where it's not necessarily about the substance being in my life. It's about how you think, how you talk, the things you say, and being prompt, being at your meetings, being where you're supposed to be, because those are things that alcoholics and drug addicts, they don't do very well. So after you stop using the substances, there's a number of things that you have to try to get counseling and help for, because how you're going to live without that substance in your life, that's new to you. So there's a lot of things you have to learn. Josh is going through what we see all the time. Now, I'm not going to say he made a slip or he had a setback, but there are hard things that you have to deal with as far as your life that you're not prepared for, because it's the first time, typically since you've been an adult, that you haven't been medicated in some form or fashion.
You and I talked earlier this morning, and you were talking about how the fact that he's not at training camp, despite what the release was that he put out there, that this is all part of what I'm going through and I wasn't going to be here, that's not good for him, that he needs to have that regimented daily thing to do, place to be, and that helps him.
Not only is it or you would think not good for him, but it also, I feel like I can say confidently, was not part of the plan. Well,
No.
The idea that it would have been
training camp.
Listen, I'm not saying he should not have constant maintenance, or maybe he have a scheduled, listen, I'm going to do an inpatient 72 hours at some point, like just to recalibrate.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you wouldn't schedule that for the very start of training camp. Like something, no. I'm not saying he failed a drug test. I'm not saying,
no,
I don't know what happened.
Awry
something that they had a schedule laid out, and something happened or something triggered inside him that made them diverge from that schedule. That's the only logical way I can look at
Yeah,
this.
and just the thing about it, if you work in a private job, and we have thousands of people that are going through treatment and through the process that Josh is going through, they're just not doing it in the public eye. They could be at their job, they could be away from their job, and it wouldn't be the type of attention. So when you have the type of issues Josh, myself, and others have, and you have to try to get well in the public eye, it's very, very hard. There are times during, not professional athletes, because them being associated with their team, that's different. But there are times in the rehab process. I'm associated with the company, Ambrosia. We have 6 training facilities around the country. There are times where patients will have to divert from their program. We still believe they're on course, but we have to deviate from what we've prescribed for them for their best interest. They might have to get on some other type of medication. They might have to see some other type of specialist. But their ability to be able to live and have power in their life on a regular basis, that's the goal. Obviously, something has happened where they don't feel like Josh being there at training camp, because one of the things that's been proven that as an alcoholic or a drug addict, when you are at your job, and that's the reason why the NFL changed the rules and bent the rules. If you have a street drug conviction or you've been suspended, you are allowed to be
at the facility.
At the facility.
Sure.
Now, not when you're suspended for a year, but the other times when you're fined or you have a 4-game, because they know being a daily regiment, being around your teammates, being at your having a regular schedule is better for recovering addicts.
How supportive has the league been and have the Browns been? And is it in their best interest to get Josh back in there and try to get him back on the team and up and going again?
How supportive? The league can't be any more supportive. The league actually changed the rule. They're not going to say this. They're not going to admit it. They actually changed the rule to be able to help Josh out. There was a stage in the drug program where you were suspended, and they dialed that back. Where you were suspended 6 games, they dialed that back to 2 to 4 games. Well, now you have there's an extra suspension or fine in the player's process.
In the front end of it. They built into the front end of it before this is one of the reasons why sometimes when we're talking about guys who haven't been suspended before from the league, sometimes says, we can't be so certain they're not in the drug program. Just because we haven't seen them hit the 4-game suspension yet.
Yes.
Because now
they've already been fined a couple game checks.
It used to be, I think, 2.
We have a couple stars in the league that are in that phase. I'm talking about big time. It would be earth-shattering news that if they were to trigger that next step.
And if it was a time machine 10 years ago, at least 2 of those guys would have already triggered it. But they have now built in where you can lose
extra step.
An extra, they give you a, so this is, listen, I happen to think, and this obviously was not Josh Gordon's only issue, I happen to think pro sport leagues testing for marijuana is ludicrous. But that is an extreme position. The NFL gets a lot of criticism for suspending guys for marijuana usage. To CeCe's point, they have made it to where you have to fail a multitude of tests before we actually hear you're being suspended for marijuana usage. And again, I don't know, and bless you, what happened with Josh Gordon. I hope he's back with the Browns soon, and I hope that the league gave a cryptic statement here. They're like, we'll address this
when it's time.
When it's time. They didn't say, listen, Josh is in good standing with the league.
The league's got to do something. I know they've dialed it back. The league's got to do something about especially the marijuana and the testing. How many nanograms, how often they're going to test for it, because the system they have now, it's not working. It's not working. You're supposed to have a system that's supposed to help people, and I don't believe they're getting the type of help that they could.
All right, we're going to take a break. Much more First Things First right after this. Time now for Sources Start Your Morning. Earl Thomas and the Seahawks still at an impasse. According to reports, there is no indication Thomas is reporting to Seahawks camp. CeCe, how do you see this one playing out?
I think they're going to trade him.
Yup.
You know, I think that right now, when you look at all the changes that they made, he doesn't want to come to a camp, doesn't want to fulfill the last year of his contract. Man, he's going to force his way out of there. If I was Seattle, I'd be looking for a draft pick or a player to move him.
I totally agree with you. Whether it's a draft pick for the upcoming year's draft or maybe a team that has a surplus of offensive linemen, that has a team that, not that a lot of teams have that, but a team that has, hey, we've got an older guy that we're transitioning away from to bring in a younger player. Like, I think Earl Thomas is going to play this year, but I do not think it's going to be for Seattle.
And he's still a good player.
Absolutely.
Moving on to baseball now. Tim Tebow is likely out for the season after breaking his hand. The 30-year-old was hitting .273 this season for the Mets AA affiliate. There was recent talk of him getting called up for his injury. Nick, will Tebow ever make the majors?
Listen, if you consider a September call-up making the majors, yes. I don't know if he'll be on an opening day roster, but yes, and I think he would have done it this year. The Mets are a Travis mockery. They would have brought him in
And
just
what?
Travis mockery. That's when it's past a travesty or a sham or a mockery. Travis mockery. But credit to Tebow. I mean, 270 in Double-A is your secondary sport you pick up later in life sports-wise. I mean, I credit the guy. He's rich, and he's still grinding away in minor league baseball. Good for him, man.
Yeah, I talked to John Franco, the great Mets player. He lives close to me, and talked about Tebow. They were going to call him up definitely at the end of the season. They like having him around because even at 30, he's a great example to their farm system. They don't have a great farm system, but he's a great example of how hard they want a professional to work. So they enjoy having Tebow around. They really think him to be authentic, and he's been a great influence on the younger players.
And he doesn't have hand, foot, and mouth disease like some of the Mets, which is nice.
Interguard. To the NBA now, Michael Beasley was introduced for the Lakers yesterday, and he rejected the notion that the Lakers will have chemistry issues next season. Beasley said, quote, "For there to even be a narrative of the personalities in this room is judgment enough for me, and I don't want to be a part of that." Nick, are you buying Beasley's comments?
I'm buying that Beasley will not be a part of any chemistry issues if there are chemistry issues. Michael Beasley's not a bad guy.
No.
Michael Beasley was disappointing given the fact that he was a star at Kansas State and he was the #2 pick of the draft. But he's carved out a nice role in the NBA that he understands what his role is, and he's never been a guy teammates don't like. He's just a little goofy, gives funny interviews, and has some wacky tattoos, so people think he's more of a knucklehead than he actually is. He's not a bad dude, so I don't blame him for pushing back on that narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't just paint all the players. You know, Rondo, he has a different set of issues. JaVale McGee, a different set of issues. Beasley, not living up to the hype that's been on him since high school, that's a different set of issues. But that don't make them bad people or bad teammates.
All right, finally, Dirk Nowitzki signed a deal to return to the Mavericks for a record 21st straight season with Dallas. Dirk, who turned 40 in June, scored 12 points a game last year. He's 6th all-time in points. Cece, how impressive has Dirk's career been?
It's been impressive. It's been very, very impressive that of all the players outside the United States, Dirk Nowitzki's probably the best player that we've ever seen in the NBA from abroad.
Him or Hakeem?
Yes.
He's definitely, I knew where your brain was. You were thinking of the European players. He's definitely the greatest European player ever.
And I've heard people say that before, too. Yep. So I would bring Hakeem into it. But if you look playing basketball for over 20 years, I mean, he has a pure love for the game of basketball. He's been very, very fortunate that he could play there in Dallas with an organization. But Dirk, as a great player, he carved out this long career. Because a number of years ago, Dirk, man, took a huge pay cut. Like, Dirk, you don't have no problem with him. Dirk knows what his role is compared to some other players that we think are superstars. And when they decide to take that pay cut, Dirk has been, him and Mark Cuban have been negotiating for a long time. Dirk taking a pay cut for them to try to sign a superstar, a max contract player. This year, he's only making $5 million. So his role, he takes less shot. He's still the leader of the team. But he's carved out these last 5 years because he took substantially less money than a player like him would be taking. So he knew what he wanted to do, and that was play a long time in that organization. So he made himself where he would be far more appealing for them to continue this relationship.
And he's still good. Guy shot 40% from three last year on 4.5 threes a game. Dirk Nowitzki, everyone says what C said, and you're correct, I'm not disparaging it. That is he the greatest foreign-born player ever? Is he one of the? We can remove foreign-born. Dirk Nowitzki is one of the 20 greatest players in the history of this sport. He's a 13-time All-Star, 12-time All-NBA guy. He has an MVP, a Finals MVP, and a championship. He was the best player on a team that won 50 games 11 straight years in the West. He's 6th in points. About 2 months into the season, he'll be 5th in points, passing Wilt Chamberlain. Here's the full list of guys with as many All-Star games as Dirk, an MVP, and a Finals MVP. Kareem, Kobe, Wilt, Duncan, LeBron, Jordan. That's it. This is an all-time great who now has a record that in today's NBA, I wonder if it will ever be approached, which is the most seasons ever with one organization. 21 years, not only playing, but with one organization. I mean, people remember he was traded for Robert Tractor Trailer in the draft. Not the greatest move the Milwaukee Bucks have ever made. Rest in peace, Tractor Trailer. But this is a guy who was the best player on a 67-win team and then the best player on a team that beat the Heatles in their first iteration. An all-time great that doesn't seem to want to stop, and I'm glad he's not stopping. He's been one of my favorite players ever to watch.
And to Chris's point, you can extend your career if you understand what your role is, what you're capable of doing, and if you're willing to play how the team wants you to play, and those exact minutes. We won't name names. Moving on to the reason the Boston Celtics general...
Stay in shape, too.
Okay. Moving on to the reason the Boston Celtics general manager Danny Ainge is a happy man this morning. 1, he made our show again. 2, Gordon Hayward can play basketball again. Quick history, Gordon Hayward played less than a quarter last season. 6 minutes maybe before horrifically breaking that ankle. But he posted this video of himself working out, and he seems to be making really good progress. Nick, how important is having Gordon Hayward in the mix for the Celtics next season?
It's obviously incredibly important. He was their key free agent acquisition last offseason before you knew they were trading for Kyrie Irving. Like, he was the star piece that you thought Boston might actually be able to get without giving up any of their assets, because he was a free agent, because he had the reputation or the history with Brad Stevens, and he was coming off his best year as a pro. He's not going to help the Celtics defensively. He's not going to be a negative defensively, but he's not going to help them defensively. But what he will give them is a proven scorer and a guy that can score at all 3 levels, at the rim, mid-range, and from three-point range. I'm very interested to see how the Celtics juggle their rotation of forwards, because they have something of an embarrassment of riches there, and I'm curious to see how he and Kyrie play together. That's the only real question mark to me about Boston next year, is we've never seen he and Kyrie play together, and those shots have to come from somewhere. Like, Kyrie takes last year 18 a game. The 2 young kids took 10 and 11 a game. Who's giving up shots to get Gordon Hayward his career average about 15 a game? But you're adding an all-star caliber player, and so he's wildly important. If folks are right that the Celtics actually not only are favorites in the East, but could compete with the Warriors, then that means Gordon Hayward's going to be full go from the very beginning.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching him play, because I think people over a short period of time, they forget who players are. Boston, their roster, the way we saw them playing against Cleveland in the Eastern Conference Final without Gordon and without Kyrie, I mean, who is Gordon Hayward? If he had played last season and it averaged in double figures, anything over 10 points, it's been the 7th straight season in the NBA after his first season as a high draft pick from Butler, averaging 5 points. So there's only been a few players that have had that type of steady growth. I think he's one of 13 players that have seen their scoring average over the first 7 seasons increase. So he is a special player, but he's not a high-volume shooter. The most shots he's ever taken, a little short of 16. Most shots he's ever taken in a game. That was in the last year in Utah. So for me, coming from Butler, the head coach of the Celtics is from Butler.
Right.
I believe he's a system player. I also believe that late in games, he does work. He's not an all-star, but he's a marginal, like, all-star player that he can get you buckets, he can get you calls at the end of the game, and you need forwards, wing guys to be able to defend. I believe he's going to be just a different version of Al Horford, what he did for him last year, be able to score from all 3 different levels. He's got to be able to improve his three-point shot, because that's going to open up the court and really help the Celtics. But he's going to have to, he's going to have to surrender some minutes and some time with Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And so I'm not worried about his health. I believe he's a good player, and because he already has a max deal, he don't have anything to prove. So I like the fact, and I believe he is a difference maker and what's going to make the Celtics a special team.
What about what Nick brought up, just sharing the spotlight, the minutes, the time, possessions with Kyrie Irving?
It's not necessarily the spotlight, because Gordon is not that type of player. His career high is averaging 15 points, so it's not like
15 shots.
Yeah, 15 shots. And, what, 16 points?
Well, his last year in Utah, he jumped it up. He was at 22 his last year in Utah.
So the thing about Gordon Hayward is he is a role player. If he stays true to form the way he was at Butler and at Utah, he should be able to fit in. And he's already got the max contract. So if he's trying to win championships, this is a perfect fit for him.
I'm not worried about Gordon's mentality at all, especially because coming off that injury, guys tend to feel as grateful is the wrong word, but appreciative to be back playing the game. And I don't think the minutes are going to be a problem either. You got 96 minutes a game to play your two forward spots. Brown, Tatum, and Hayward can all play around 32 minutes a game, and maybe a little more if you're going to go small. I just want to. Somebody's going to sacrifice shots, and I want to know who it is. Because if I'm the Celtics, Tatum last year took 10 a game. I don't want him shooting fewer than that. Jaylen Brown took 11 a game. I don't want him shooting fewer than that. Al Horford was incredibly efficient at his, I think, 13 a game. Again, this field goal attempts. So the person that you would think is going to have to sacrifice the shots is Kyrie, who actually last year in Boston took slightly fewer shots than he did his last year in Cleveland. That's the only question to me on the offensive end, is where at some point somebody's giving shots back. You don't want it to be Brown and Tatum, who are your two budding young stars. I don't know if Kyrie wants it to be him.
What about Jaylen Brown playing more two-guard for them?
Sure, absolutely.
Kyrie 1, Jaylen Brown 2.
Hayward and Tatum 3-4. That's what I think will be their starting lineup. Which is why I'm not worried about the minutes. That even if you slot them all at forward, you can play 32 a night. And if one of them's playing two guard, you can play him 35, 36 a night. No matter what position he plays on the court, the shot's got to come from somewhere. That's the thing that Brad Stevens is going to have to juggle for the first time in his pro career. First time in his pro career, he's got not too much talent, but he's got a lot of talent. He's not making pieces fit.
Does getting Gordon Hayward back make the Celtics the best team in the East coming into this season now?
I think so. I think the combination. Gordon Hayward is part of the story. I don't want to single him out more than Kyrie, because Kyrie's still got to be special, especially in closing out games. I want to see how Kyrie's going to play defense, and I want to see how Kyrie is with that knee. But he is one of the key ingredients because they have all these younger players. And what if you even started where Gordon started coming off the bench? Him playing minutes with that 2 rotation would be huge for them. You need talent in the NBA because this is the Warriors NBA. So Boston is the team. Their roster, to me, they have the second most talent of anyone in the NBA.
CC mentioned something there in passing that I think is important. If we're talking about a health concern for Boston going into next year, it is not, to me, Gordon Hayward's leg. It is Kyrie's knee. Gordon Hayward's leg is a one-time fluke injury. We saw Paul George suffer a very similar one. He was as good as Paul George always was, his first full year back, and you don't worry about that injury again. Kyrie's knee and the multiple surgeries on such a young player, that's the injury to monitor with Boston, not whether or not Gordon Hayward's leg is fully healthy.
All right, got to take a break. Coming up, do the Cleveland Browns have a shot at making the playoffs next season? That was not a typo. I did say the word playoffs. That's next up. First Things First. Welcome back to First Things First. Coach Eric Mangini is here to wax poetic about all things football. Coach, thanks for being with us. You get ready to wax? Let's do it.
Was that in the teleprompter?
No. That was inappropriate.
Freestyle.
Nice suit. Nice suit.
Hey,
Nice suit. That's
Fox
good.
got you together.
It's my waxing suit.
Your suit looks great. I should have gone with clothing.
That's waxing.
Clothing. Hey, the city of Cleveland still reeling over the loss of LeBron, now hanging their hat on the Browns, and not just the color brown, the actual football team, the Cleveland Browns. They've only won a single game in the last 2 seasons, but they still have high hopes for the upcoming season. Newcomer Jarvis Landry says the Browns definitely a playoff caliber team. Coach, I'll start with you. What has to happen for the Browns to be in the playoff race? And I would imagine winning more than one game is going to be somewhere along the lines of your answer.
Yeah, that would be part of it. Look, start by not making predictions. Like, let's not talk about the playoffs at this point. Let's just get into training camp. Like, that would be a really good start. But I do think the move that they made at quarterback, where they went and they got Tyrod Taylor, they got a guy who protects the football. One of the biggest problems for Cleveland is they lose a lot of games. It's not a function of them winning the game. It's
Coach,
a function of them.
What is that? Like, we're watching a game. What do you mean Cleveland lose the game? I know a coach taught me, hey, half the games are lost, and guys start looking around like, okay, what does that really mean?
Yeah, and the saying is more games are lost in the NFL than won, and that's self-inflicted wounds. And that's whether it's jumping off sides, whether it's running the wrong route so that the read isn't correct and then it's an interception. It's all of those penalties and turnovers and things that are completely under your control. It's situational football. It's understanding the context of the game. If you can get to that point where you're making good decisions on a consistent basis and not hurting yourself, then you have a real chance to win the game. But you've got to get out of your own way before you even get to that point.
And last year, if people watched Cleveland, and I know not a lot of people did, but if you watched them, they actually moved the ball relatively well, given the fact they didn't win a game. And when you say they lost games before they gave themselves a chance to win it, I'd never seen a team in my life watching NFL football who had more red zone, not even red zone, gold zone, inside the 10-yard line, inside the 5-yard line, turnovers. Like DeShone Kizer, you'd watch him, and it was almost always the quarterback. It wasn't a lot of fumbles from Duke Johnson. It was DeShone Kizer would make some good plays, drive him up the field, and then it would be a fumbled snap, or a strip sack, or a terrible interception. That's where Tyrod, while Baker gets ready, can add a steadying force, because they were in these games and it was critical, self-inflicted wounds at the worst possible times, seemingly week in, week out, which is what led them to 0-16.
Well, one thing they're going to have to do, because I believe some of that responsibility goes on Hugh as the head coach, and now with Todd Haley being the play caller, I believe having that removed from Hugh, it should be able to help him. I mean, of course, it is a make or break year. But have you guys seen Jarvis Landry playing in the playoffs, like when he was in Miami? Have you guys actually seen?
That's what I was about to say. Jarvis Landry's great playoff history.
So I always watch the report. I always watch who the report comes from. And anytime you're like a player, like, okay, this guy would have 10 years of playoff experience. So he would know a playoff team when he saw one. So I would give him some credibility to what he's saying.
But
Jarvis, stop. Stop. You don't know what a playoff team looks like. So stop trying to tell us what a playoff team looks like. You guys won one game in 2 years. Okay? That's the team you're on.
But
what?
So here's a team that spent the last 2 years collecting the top draft picks. Are they ready now to take, and the quarterback that they seemingly wanted, are they ready to now take all this out for a spin and do something with it?
Well, it's funny. I was talking to somebody recently, and they said they couldn't wait to see the Browns during training camp. And I said, I can't wait to see what they do differently. So they've had 2 training camps, and they've taken one approach throughout the course of these 2 training camps. What structurally is different? What approach is Hugh taking that's different than the approach that he's had? And I agree, bringing in a guy like Todd Haley should free him up to be more of the complete head coach. But is he going to be able to stay out of Todd's way? Is he going to be able to allow Todd to be the best version of his offense, or is it going to be that constant pushing and meddling to where there's infighting and it never quite meshes?
I also think people need to understand that a 5-game improvement in the NFL is a spectacular year. And a 5-game improvement would, of course, get them to 5-11, which would be another top 5, top 6 draft pick, most likely. The playoffs, playoffs are obviously, if they are in contention for the playoffs in the 2019 season, the Browns have done something far better than they've done over the course of the last decade. But I want to go back to the turnovers for a moment, because they not only turned the ball over 41 times, they only forced 13. Which both those stats seem impossible. That you're going to turn the ball over almost 3 times a game, and you're going to force fewer than 1 turnover per game. It's not only that they scored the fewest points in the league, they allowed the 2nd most points in the league. So, key stats, and I understand turnovers fluctuate from year to year, but the key stats that you can just circle, okay, where are you in turnover margin? That's usually about where you're going to be in standings. They were dead last with a bullet. Where are you in scoring margin? That's where you're going to be in standings. They were dead last with a bullet. They were clearly the worst team in football.
Yeah, it doesn't help on the eve of training camp till you get the type of news like Josh Gordon, because that's the same type of thing that we've gotten used to seeing coming out of Cleveland. I think one of the adjustments that they did make was Tyrod at quarterback, because that will help with the turnovers, and that will help immediately. I thought their wide receiving core was going to be much improved, but I don't know who's going to be out there for the first game. If they want to improve, if they want to try to be considered to be a playoff team, they need to be able to get to the quarterback. All right? They need to get to the quarterback. Tyrod's going to help them on the interceptions. Get to the quarterback. They're not one of the most effective pass rushing team. And with having one of the great young pass rushers in Myles Garrett, they should be able to generate a pass rush. And the third thing is, The Cleveland Browns, you can't forget where you are, all right? You're in that division with Baltimore, with Pittsburgh, and with Cincinnati. All three of those rosters are better than yours. You play outdoors. You need to develop a running game and a tough defense to be able to win in those climates. There is no advantage for them playing in the stadium that they play at. Cincinnati plays outside. Pittsburgh plays outside. Baltimore plays outside. So they need to develop a physically pounding football team to be able to be effective in that division.
And all three of those teams have an identity. All three of those teams have continuity for the most part. All three of those teams understand the division and the challenges that they face. To me, it's take care of the football, take care of your responsibilities, protect what you can protect, control what you can control. Don't lose the game, and the other things will fall into place.
Can I ask you a quick question about the coach? And I don't want to put you in a bad position, but this is a league where we see every year it seems like the leash on coaches gets shorter and shorter. We saw Ben McAdoo go from 11-5 in the playoffs to out of a job before the next season was even over. Hugh Jackson, not only does he seem to have a lot of supporters in the media, but he has obviously an enormous supporter within the organization. What do you think of the pull Hugh Jackson has there, why he's been able to, in a league where nobody has job security, be 1-31 in the last 2 years, and it didn't even seem like he was on the hot seat at the end of the season?
Well, the other issue that Cleveland's had pretty consistently is the turnover. And every 2 years, you're switching out the head coach.
Year
you're switching
before,
out
they had turned over the front office, the general manager. So how much can you get rid of?
And so the teams that have continuity, teams like New England or Pittsburgh or teams that are consistent, they just prey on the teams that are constantly turning guys over, and they get their players, and they play off their mistakes, and they play off the inexperience of the new staff. Looks like the owner said, okay, I want to have some continuity. I want to give this guy another chance, but there is still a change in the front office. So it's not like that group got to stay together. Now we're going to have to see the dynamic between the GM and the head coach. And look, we don't know how that's going to play out.
And Nick, Hugh Jackson did jump in that cold lake. So
oh, yeah,
there's
you're
that.
right. I forgot about that.
You guys remember
Absolutely.
that he did that.
Said if we go 1-15 again, I'm jumping in the lake.
Job security.
And went 0-16.
I ever
jumped
heard
in
it.
the lake.
Coach, stick around. We'll see you a little bit later in the show. Coming up, why would Isaiah Thomas consider returning to Boston? That's next on First Things First. Welcome back to First Things First. NBA analyst Sarah Kustok joins the show. Always a good time when Sarah's here. Always a good time when Sarah's here.
It's always a good time here.
Oh, thank you very much,
It
Sarah.
really is. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's talk a little Boston Celtics, sort of. Isaiah Thomas. It was just the end of the 2017 season that the aforementioned Isaiah Thomas was riding high with the Boston Celtics, playing lights out in the postseason and in play for a big money contract. Then Cleveland happened. Then the Lakers happened. His injured hip's still happening. And he just joined the Nuggets, signing for only the veterans minimum. He spoke out at an interview with Adrian Wojnarowski about playing through injury with Boston. He said, quote, if I didn't play in the playoffs, I'd be okay. I'd be getting paid. I'd be who I am, who I was. But at the same time, it was hard for me to sit out. I just lost my sister, one of the closest people in my life. Basketball was the only thing that was going to help me out. I played until I literally couldn't play anymore, and that was not a good business decision if I was looking in the long term, but I was looking in the right now. That's just what it was. It's a lot there from Isaiah Thomas. Sarah, is Isaiah's story a cautionary tale for other NBA players contemplating playing through injury, especially with the bright lights of the postseason and whatnot?
I absolutely think it's something to be aware of and be conscientious of. And I think with Kawhi Leonard, for as much attention and focus on his injury occurred throughout the course of last season and even up until now, players know their own body. Now, I don't know the ins and outs. I don't know if we do. We're not doctors here with Isaiah Thomas about if he hadn't played in the if you'll remember, he got injured 2 months left in the regular season. He got hurt Game 6 of the Eastern Conference semifinals, continued to play through that, and then was knocked out essentially in Game 2 of the Eastern Conference final. I'm not sure, and I don't know if they had determined what point it was that actually made Isaiah Thomas's injury to the point it's at. He waited. He didn't have surgery up until the point of July because they were trying to rehab through what he was going through rather than opting for surgery. But long story short on all of that with Isaiah Thomas, there's nothing that he can change now. And he's at a point with Denver where he thought he would be signing a max deal this offseason. He thought he was going to be a player. We all remember the Brinks Trucks sandals, but instead he had one offer from a place of where he played for Coach Mike Malone in Sacramento. It's a veterans minimum deal. But what I liked most about his conversation with Woj, that he said that is in the past. And I'm putting that behind me. I'm moving forward because he needs to, because he has an opportunity to show what he can do. In that season with Boston, he was top 5 in MVP voting. He was a top 3 scorer in the league. So to show people where his health is at, the type of player he's at, I think is very important for him in this point in his career.
Here's the sports tragedy of the Isaiah Thomas situation. Again, I say sports tragedy. He didn't have to play the way he did the 2017 season in Boston. He did the year before in Boston. He was 22 points a game. His last year in Sacramento, he was 20 points a game and a good three-point shooter every step of the way. Like, I don't think anyone thought, listen, Isaiah Thomas, all of a sudden, now he's a 27, 28 point a game, top 5 MVP guy. It was a perfect storm of situations. That Boston team didn't have any other guys who could reliably score the basketball. Tatum's not on the team yet. Obviously, Kyrie's not there. Jaylen Brown's a rookie. But if he's just a 20-point-a-game guy, he's still, maybe he's not a max deal, but there's a big gulf between the max and the minimum, and he ended up with the minimum. I hadn't heard him say one of the reasons he played was to help him deal with the grief of his sister passing, and that's an intriguing wrinkle to this because it makes you understand more so why for him in the moment he wanted to do it, other than simply, I'm the best player on the team, we think we make the NBA Finals.
Well, and with that being said, and CC, you as a player can answer this, I'm not sure if he, in the moment, and regardless of what the doctors were telling him, he's playing in the playoffs. He's just had a near MVP type season. Do you think as an athlete in that moment, despite the pain, that you would be able to think about the long term, the long view, big picture, and not say that I want to be out there to help my team compete?
No one in real time has a picture of the future. So what you do is you make the best decision based on the medical advice that's been given to you for that moment. And we can all sit and live our lives looking in the rearview mirror. There was a time and point with the Vikings where I had tore up my shoulder, and I was trying to stay healthy. Plus, also, I was on an unbelievable pace to potentially break the NFL record. I ended up playing that season, and the next season, the season after that, I immediately had shoulder surgery, and my shoulder is still wrecked to this day. It was a price that I decided to do. These are parts of being a professional athlete. Part of the reason why we see these great things, these great feats, is because of the things they overcome. Now, if he had gotten through this, we'd be talking about, man, Isaiah Thomas, oh, man, he's great. This is part of it. You have to take care of your body. Your body is your moneymaker. So you have to make the best decisions for your long-term health. Because if you're not healthy, and of course he made the wrong decision, but being an undersized player, I don't think he went about this the right way. You are a small guy. Like, your body is more important than a big guy, because a big guy we're going to give more chances to. If a small guy gets hurt, especially with a leg, a hip injury, oh, man, it could potentially end his career. So I don't think that he thought about that. You cannot live your life as an athlete because you'll always be pushing through. That's what coaches do, teach you how to push through. And there's a difference between an injury, all right, and an ailment. All right, he was really, really injured, and him continuing to play brought long-term effects.
The other thing he said to Wojnarowski in that article was that he'd go back to Boston if given the opportunity. Are you surprised, Sarah, there's not more resentment towards the team that not only he played for, but then eventually traded him?
Well, if we remember, there was a lot of resentment when it happened.
At the time.
And even when he went to Cleveland. And I believe throughout the course of his time in Cleveland, in that locker room, he carried that bitterness with him. But an entire year has passed. I think he now looks at the landscape. He looked at the market, realizing, again, he had one deal, veterans minimum, from a Denver Nuggets team. And so absolutely, for a business decision, and even personally, he wants to play. And so Boston, he understands what he did there, how beloved he was by the fans, but more than anything, Brad Stevens in the system, in the fit, and how good that team is going to be. And so it didn't surprise me at all that if the opportunity arose there, which it did not, that he would take that.
Yeah, of course, he had to say that. He had to repair his image also. But we talk about the injury, him deciding to play in the playoffs. Was that part of him getting over the grief of his sister? That's something we can never determine. So we shouldn't even be trying to understand that aspect. But his decision to play there was a bad decision. Once they had traded him to Cleveland, him coming back in Cleveland was another bad decision. And that's something that he's got to be able to live with. He didn't have to come back to Cleveland as soon as he did. And not only was he still hurt and ended up hurting himself again, but his overall personality, who he was as a person, it took some hits.
Yeah.
So this was a tough transition for a guy that made a couple decisions that will alter his career. He will never get back in that type of light. And to do this type of article, it's a feel-good article, all right? He signs a veteran minimum. It doesn't make sense for him to say, no, I wouldn't go back to Boston.
He needs the whole league available to him. He's not...
And he needs to repair a certain part of his image, too.
And he also knows, if you were being very specific, hey, listen, Boston might, a year from now, have an opening at the point guard position. Like, he hears the same rumors about Kyrie. We hear he knows how good he was with Brad Stevens. One last note for me on Isaiah Thomas. I guess one of the reasons I root for him is because his story is such an unexpected one. Sarah, you and I a couple weeks ago went to watch high school basketball, right?
Yeah.
And we saw a kid on this team my son used to play for who is Isaiah Thomas's size, playing against high schoolers. Now, he's going to be a D1 player, but we saw how much harder he had to work against high school players to get to the rim, to get his shot off, to do anything, because he's 5'7.5", 5'8". This guy was the last pick of the draft at that size, and he almost won a scoring title in the NBA. And 12 months later, he has one offer, and it's almost a courtesy offer because Mike Malone coached him, and in Denver, they're not playing any defense anyway. They're just going to try to outscore people. Like, that's not how this story's supposed to end. And not all stories have a happy ending. I get that. It doesn't always end the way it's supposed to end. But I hope Isaiah Thomas has another chapter. It's not going to be a max contract chapter, but a 3-year, $24 million chapter would be better than the one he's tracking towards right now.
At 5'7", he's already had a remarkable career, okay? Remarkable. To be at that height and to be playing in the NBA, it's remarkable. It's also unfortunate, but we are a collection of our decisions.
Thank you for listening to the First Things First podcast. Remember, leave us a review and tell us what you think. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and catch us on FS1 Monday through Friday, 6:30 a.m. Eastern. For Chris Carter and Nick Wright, I'm Jenna Wolf. So long, everybody.